Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to today's webinar, TA in Tech, how to go from passenger to pilot. If you joined us today, it's probably because you recognize or appreciate the fact that it's time for TA to shift its approach and to move from the passenger seat and become proactive drivers of organizational success. And that, my friends, is what we're going to dive into today. I would like to welcome Susan Lamott, who will be our moderator. I'm really excited. This is the first time our team has ever had the opportunity to partner with Susan. I've heard a lot about her over the years, and I think I got a formal introduction to Susan from Pete Radloff maybe recently, but if you're out there, Pete, thank you. So we're really excited to have Susan here today. And our panelists today, Rondi Meyer, Nate Olsted, and Molly Lindsay are going to be our panelists for today's discussion. And I'd like to extend a super special thank you to our friends at CoderPad for making today's webinar possible. CoderPad works with talent acquisition practitioners, hiring managers, and generally great companies hiring developers. They empower teams around the world to screen and interview engineers with gamified assessments, take-home projects, and live paired programming interviews. There's a chat feature located at the right-hand side of your screen. Please use that for general discussion. There's also a Q&A tab. So if you've got questions for today's panelists, please try to use the Q&A area so that we can get to those questions quickly. And without any further ado, Susan, once again, thank you so much. I'm going to hand things over to you and turn off my camera and mic, and I'll be watching from the sidelines.
Great. Thank you so much, Joshua and Molly, Rondi, Nate. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I will echo the thanks to CoderPad. It's so wonderful to have all of these organizations that support us to have these great conversations that are so important. I think particularly in TA technology, we spend so much time online. We forget the opportunity to step back and actually talk to each other. And there's a famous quote by a communications scholar. His name is Marshall McLuhan, and he says that the medium is the message. And I think that's so powerful in technology because so many of our most intractable technology challenges, particularly in talent acquisition, need to be solved by voice, need to be solved by conversations just like this one today. So I'm really excited to host this incredibly talented and experienced group of panelists. And our focus today is to cover a couple of things. We're going to talk a little bit about, of course, about moving from passenger to pilot, right? So as you're thinking about technology, how can you really take control? So many of us that have been in talent acquisition for a long time, we've spent a lot of time doing, right? Being the order taker or being the individual contributor. And then all of a sudden you're in charge of something, whether that's a system or a platform. And so it becomes really important to make sure that you're thinking about how your role might change. So what does that look like? And how can you be strategic about that? So that's what we're going to start our conversation talking about. We're also going to make sure we cover some practical approaches, and we'll talk a little bit about what does it look like to build relationships, because the collaboration with your stakeholders is the most important part of technology, which is really crazy to say and to think about sometimes. Technology is not successful without the people. And sometimes it's the offline work we do that makes the online work most successful. And then finally, we'll be able to tap into Rondi, Molly, and Nate's success and experiences and some of the battle scars they have as it relates to some of those common hurdles and tactics. Forgive me in my voice a little bit. I am recovering from bronchitis, but I'm really excited to be with you today. I am the founder and CEO of Exacquio. We are an employer brand and experience consulting firm. And as of late, we spend a lot of time with our clients who are navigating these complicated talent acquisition technology platforms to drive both employer brand, candidate experience, recruitment strategy. And what they're really struggling with is how to drive results and how to use these platforms and technologies to drive results. And ultimately, part of the reason, one of the major reasons that we've uncovered that they struggle is they don't have that strategic perspective. They get really excited about buying a technology and all the things it can do. They want to just plug and play, or if you remember those old chicken rotisserie commercials, set it and forget it and walk away. And we know that tech doesn't work that way. It really requires strategy. So I'm really eager to dig into our conversation, but before I do, I want to give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. I've put my LinkedIn link in the chat. I'll encourage each of them to add theirs too. Please connect with us as we go. But Rondi, I'll start with you if you want to do a brief introduction of yourself.
Sure. Hi. Well, thank you everyone that made the time out of their day. I know TA is very busy and very busy right now. So I'm Rhonda Meyer. I work for a company called Frisia, and I lead talent acquisition, global talent acquisition for tech and product roles. I've been with Frisia about 2.5 years, and most of my career has been in HR, except fun fact, I used to be a high school economics teacher. And my team resides in North America, so both Canada and in the US, and then in India.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rondi. Nate, how about you?
Hey, my name is Nate Olstead. I am the founder and CEO of Talent Team. We are a recruitment strategy and consulting firm, somewhat similar to some of the stuff that you do, Susan, less on employer branding, but more on like TA strategy, build out, scaling, helping companies think about like the most optimal way to deliver, right? Because that's the most important part is delivering at the end of the day. I've been in recruiting for, I don't know, 18 years, 19 years or so. Started big companies, ended up going the startup route. I was the head of recruiting for multiple startups. I've had successful exits and scale ups, and kind of seen it all from seed all the way through IPO. So have a good lens on good, bad, and indifferent at all different stages.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Molly, last but certainly not least.
Yes. Hi, I'm Molly. I am the Director of Product Marketing at CoderPad. So Josh already did a great intro to CoderPad. So thank you for that. I feel like I'm in a little bit of a unique position being on this panel here. I speak with talent acquisition professionals as well as hiring managers and engineers and interviewers pretty much every day. So please lean on me in this panel to give like an objective point of view, because I've certainly met with lots of you and I have a lot of empathy for what you guys go through, because I know it is not easy. So thank you for having me today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. Like I said, I want to dig right in. Certainly we can dig right into the technology itself, but I think it's more important to think about the shift that we all take when it comes to strategy. One of the things that I always like to do with clients is talk about the importance of that shift as it relates to your own career, right? Because one of the things to think about is when you're changing roles, when you're moving from individual contributor, when you're becoming a strategic partner, it's a chance to set yourself apart and to really think about, okay, I have a chance to really make an impact on the organization and to show everyone how I can be strategic. So as we sort of dig in, Rondi, I want to start with you. What are some of the key steps that you think talent acquisition leaders can really take as they make this transition from being kind of the order taker, the individual contributor, to shifting the mindset to being that true strategic partner? What's your take?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things is understanding the business in which your team and you are recruiting for. I think a lot of times people just go in and they're like, what is the role? And what do I need to find? What do I need to go source for? But actually understanding, what does our business do? What does your team do? How does this particular role fill the gap in your team? How does it help contribute it, to the business objectives? I think so often, and I think a lot of times, and I've worked at organizations in both ways. I would say Frisia, thank you, is not this. I do feel like a really good talent partner there, but they're just like, just post the job and get me resumes, and that's not helpful, right? So we actually do a very long kickoff. We bring market insights to that kickoff. We talk about the market to the best of our understanding at that point. We ask lots of questions. So I think really just understanding the business, the pain points, and asking a lot of questions, being curious.
The question piece is so important. Curiosity is key. I think sometimes we want to go in and pretend to be the experts and start talking, but really the key sign of a leader is being a good listener. Nate, what are some of the other things you've learned in your experience to make that shift?
Yeah, so this is kind of like the central, most focused area of like my whole platform and how I've ever thought about building recruiting functions, is going from the support function to a partnership. And like one of the things that pains me, and so to this day I hear this and I correct people, we don't support our team. We partner with our team. And there's the way when you act and you say that you support a team, like you act as a support function, and then you become their assistant in a way rather than driving. So like I start with really kind of ingraining in the teams of like, we're partners of the business. Everything that Rondi said, and like you basically have to act as a business partner. Like you need to be lockstep with your HR business partner for that team, because you need to know the talent gaps. You need to know the strategic growth. You need to know the attrits that are happening. Like that's part of your day-to-day business. You need to be invited to the team's weekly meetings and know like the strategic technical challenges that they're facing, the products they're facing. Like, because when you do that, you're now able to have like much deeper conversations with candidates and get higher quality candidates engaged in the process. And at the end of the day, our job here is to make hires, is to put quality butts in seats. And we can put lipstick on the pig as much as we want to, like by using technologies or fancy lingo or terms, but the quicker we can find really quality folks and get these roles filled in a timely manner, like that buys us the credibility, which earns that trust with your business, right? If you're not delivering, you're not going to get the trust, and you're not going to get the seat at the table with that business.
Yeah.
So everything has to be around that, like understanding I'm the partner. I need to know everything about it, because then I can now deliver and I can be an extension on your behalf. I think the biggest compliment that myself or any recruiter can ever get is from a candidate asking if you're actually on the team. Are you an engineer on the team, or are you a product manager on that team? Because it sounds like you know everything about it. Like that's how it should be. You should think of yourself an extension of the team.
I love that. And that's where the listening comes into play, right? And we can take our listening skills from being recruiters. If that's where you start, it's where I started my career 25 years ago, as a recruiter. You've got to listen to that intake. That listening skill translates for sure. I want to talk a little bit about listening and the importance then of translating that into that collaboration, like you talked about. Molly, I want to turn to you. How can talent acquisition professionals really foster that collaboration? So as you're gaining that trust, as Nate talked about, how do you take that trust, turn that into collaboration, especially as you're thinking about different departments, different levels of the organization? Because when you are implementing TA Tech, the amount of decision-making that happens is incredible and involves so many different people. Talk a little bit about that from where you sit, if you can.
Sure. I'd love to talk about the perspective of what I see with professionals like yourself, but also me personally. Like my role is so cross-functional. Like everything I do works with a different department. And I would have to say the key to success, this goes back to marketing 101, is know your audience, know them inside and out, know what they care about, and then really work to foster that relationship. I kind of joke to myself, like we're forced into the hugging sweater. Like I know their business, what matters to them, their success metrics. So especially working with a product or engineering team, knowing their roadmap and how you contribute to it. I will share a framework that actually one of my mentors shared with me back in the day. And this is a tool that I use with all relationships. So hopefully this is something that is useful for you too, is to think of all of them in like a matrix of a green, yellow, or red status. Like a red relationship, if you think your hiring managers and your relationship is red, that means it's contentious, you're butting heads. Yellow, like for the most part, you work well together, like things are going okay, but green is that unbreakable bond where you know that they have your back no matter what, and you have their back no matter what. And that's the type of relationship I really like to see between talent acquisition and hiring managers. And the best way that I have seen some of our customers and companies do this is by forcing those meetings every week, forcing the relationship, honestly, and embedding yourself so deep into their organization that they have just as much skin in the game as you do, and you have just as much at stake in their success.
I love the red, yellow, green. We do something similar. And I think the greens in particular too can be your advocates when you're starting out. If you find those people that are just as excited as you are. Nate, anything you would add to that?
Sorry, mute. No, I mean, nothing in particular. I think that's a really good approach. When you just kind of mentioned something about advocate, like at the end of the day, like we're not only recruiters, and we should never only just be looked at as recruiters, right? Like there's so much more, like we're so much more dynamic than just recruiters, but we're change management agents, right? And so like you had mentioned, like talking about like getting an advocate in the business, like you should absolutely, to drive change and effective strategy across the business, like need to have that, at least that one leader that's going to advocate for you and say, this is what was done right. And like this new approach really worked. Like it really worked. And then you use that to like foster change for the rest of the business. Right. But other than that, no, I don't have anything else to add towards what Molly said.
It's interesting because as we talk about thinking about what's done right, ultimately our goal is to not only make the technology work, but to show that impact, right? And why do we want to show the impact? Because we want to elevate the function. At the end of the day, I think we all get tired of the whole conversation of should HR have a seat at the table, or the respect that talent acquisition should and can deserve. And it's really nice, I think, to start to see technology converging with strategy and garnering our function the respect that it deserves. Rodney, I want to turn to you. I'd love to hear your perspective, if you can, and sharing some examples of some practical approaches or tooling that perhaps have elevated the talent acquisition function that you've seen in your experience.
You know, I know it sounds really basic, but we use tons of data out of our ATS, and we really do push our team to use the ATS. Mm-hmm. And what I will say, I've worked under a particular leader at 2 different organizations, and it's been like the most process groups I've ever worked in. But what it's been able to help me as a leader is I am able to look at the data to do some predictions with the teams. So we're currently have some really aggressive hiring goals with one of our teams, and I can bring to them, this is what we have to do to get that. And I can say, we are on track. It's very like agency mindset, is just actually bringing the data. And I will say most of my conversations are led with data out of the ATS or even out of the other tools that we use to show this is how we get there. So like we have one role, and this is not great, but we have to talk to like almost 30 people to get one hire, and that's from the screen. There are many reasons for that, but then we know this is what we actually have to do to get there. And I can just look anytime the ATS, bring that to, we have a weekly check-in, we're on track or not on track. It's really helpful. And then it gives the team just further trust in that we're doing the things we need to do to get them the people they need. But it can be, you know, hey, that's not a realistic goal right now. We're not going to be able to do that. And we can have that conversation too, which is not a great and fun thing to have as a TA team. You don't ever want to say that you can't do it, but I am I want to always be truthful. I want to like actually commit to what we can do.
Well, and I think that being able to be truthful is really important, because sometimes in the sales discussions and in the buying decisions, we see all these wonderful things that technology can do. And we have leaders that are in those buying conversations that then don't see the product until way far downstream. And so part of being strategic is helping bring them along for the ride so that they can see, we didn't buy that piece of the product, or it's going to take a while through implementation to actually be able to get that data. Or even more importantly, here's what it's going to take to resource the organization to not only get the data, but to do something with it. So I really like the way that you framed that. Molly, anything you would add to that?
Yes, actually, I was just jotting down notes when you were talking, because you mentioned something really interesting about heading into that buying process of buying technology. And the companies that I've seen be most successful implementing something like CoderPad have been the ones who upfront know these are the metrics that matter to me. They're the ones that we're going to take a snapshot of before, during implementation, and then 6 months and 12 months post. It's very surprising to me, actually, when we work with organizations who don't know what those success metrics are. And it's really hard for them, like internally, to ever gain traction with a new tool set, because they're not measuring what matters, because they don't know what matters.
Yeah.
So that's my advice, is document those metrics that matter and then continue to track them over time.
one thing I would add to the end of your sentence is not just metrics that matter, but that matter to you. There's a lot of, we have at Exactio, we have a really interesting perspective around benchmarking. And that is that it's only valuable sometimes. And I say that because we're so focused on keeping up with the Joneses in our industry. We keep looking to our left and right. When I was in-house years ago, I had an executive who was really focused on buying technology, and the slides she cared about the most in the buyer presentations were the logo slides. She just wanted to know what other Fortune 500 companies were, I worked for a Fortune 100 at the time, were buying these products. And I kept saying, it doesn't matter. I was leading a function at the time. It doesn't matter what everyone else is doing. We've got to think about what's right for us, right? We're our own business with our own unique challenges. We had over 150,000 associates. That's a lot of evergreen recs every year, right? And so I think that's what's also important too. Don't buy something because it's working great for everybody else. Come in, like you said, educated with what are the metrics that matter to you and your business. Make sure that who's selling to you understands your business and can accurately say, here's how it's going to work for you. And I think that's a really good lead in to kind of the next part of our conversation that is really, really important, I think, especially as you're shifting from being that individual contributor to thinking about strategy, and that is anticipating what's around the corner. What are those hurdles? What are those challenges that you're going to face? Nate, I want to turn to you, especially in your role and in your business. What do you see as some of those common hurdles or challenges that TA leaders face when they're trying to become strategic partners? What are the potholes that they most often step into?
Yeah, great question. And honestly, like the biggest hurdle that can be applied to a lot of things is alignment, right? Is gaining alignment on the priorities, not just hiring priorities, but interview priorities, like who owns what through the process, who are the decision makers in the process. Because I've worked with a lot of startups, and there's it's the scrappy mentality, and it's we'll do what we got to do to get over the line, and that doesn't always work, right? And so the biggest part is, I think, time, like getting the time from the leaders in the business that you're working with to get them nailed down on priorities and have them commit to it. Because if you don't, too many recruiters these days I think they are like with what's happened over the last year or two with the downsizing and all these great recruiters on the market. And I think we've kind of lost a little bit of our edge, or we've lost some of the leverage mentally at times, where we're like, oh no, like I gotta do what they want, or else like I may be seen as adversarial, and like they may get rid of me and hire somebody new, right? So I think you lose some of your voice. And what we really have to do is make sure we're holding our business accountable to things. Like we are still driving the process that we know is successful, and not just cutting corners because it's easier to do that than to like challenge the CEO on something, right? So I think for me, like it's the getting the time and to really kind of drive the message of how we're going to run a successful process. Because remember, we're running the process. I always use recruiters like an example of like, we're the executive chefs at our farm to market table, our restaurant.
Yeah.
Like they're eating off of the menu that we create. And if we let them create the menu, then like it's not going to be successful, because you may not have those resources for that menu. Right? They come to your menu, they come to your restaurant to eat off your menu. And you have to think about it that way, right? It's like, we're those partners, we kind of own the process. Now you have to be collaborative because it's their business ultimately, right? But we're helping guide them down the right path to get the right talent again, right? So I think it's finding the time and the voice to really kind of to have conversations with your leaders and keep them held accountable.
I think the analogy, the chef analogy, is a really interesting one. And there was a question in the chat about, how do you train up? How do you coach people who aren't as seasoned or experienced? So I keep thinking about back to my F&B days, and you've got perhaps a line that doesn't have very seasoned or experienced cooks or chefs on it, right? How do you train up those folks? Rondi or Molly, what would you add to that? at whether it's some of those common hurdles or challenges, or if one of those hurdles or challenges is folks who are not as experienced or seasoned? What would you add?
I just have a quick addition. I think one of the things that can be a hurdle is just focusing on the tactical. I think a lot of people in TA, we've come from sales or I came in retail was my first job out of college. And then I got into agency recruiting, and then that was that, right? Is just, we like to get things done. And sometimes focusing on and frankly, I am totally guilty of this. I need to work on it a lot because I like to get things done. I like to get things closed. But also, so with focusing on the tactical, also sometimes you need to slow down just a little bit, just to step back and say, hey, we're talking to all these people. Why are we, maybe the profile's off, and help provide and bring some data to that to say, this is what your team makeup looks like. This is the people you've hired. Are they the best fit for this? And just bringing in kind of more an advisement, mindset, and not just getting stuff filled, which is also a need to.
I think that's good advice I think it was Ben who asked that in the chat too, around less seasoned folks, is taking them from looking at the tactical, like what's the next step? What's the, next step in the journey, which we often do in talent acquisition, right? Because we're looking at our ATS, we're progressing people through each step, and instead looking at it like a chess game. If you play chess, you've ever played chess in the past, you're constantly thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead, and you're trying to rise above and look at the board as a whole. And I think that's a great coaching opportunity, is to say to those folks, not what would you do next, but what are the 5 next steps you would take? And what happens if the next step you take doesn't work the way you planned? Then what are your 3 next opportunities? So if you go to do X and it doesn't work, then what are 4 choices that come next? Having them map it out and practice and plan way in advance can be really, really helpful.
And one thing to add to that.
Yeah, please, Nate, go ahead.
Real quick. One thing to add to that is, like, we're all going to have fails, right? And like, that's all right. But it's, as a leader, it's how do you coach your employees and your team members, especially more junior ones, on failures? Like, we had a candidate decline. Like, let's walk through this. Let's do like a post-mortem. And even with the business too, right? What could we have done better with the business? And like, when you start thinking about it that way, it's like, let's assess all the things we did, not only that worked well, but didn't work well. And then we can go through that role playing of what you just said. All right, next time, like, what are the 3 things that we should probably think about? And don't answer for them.
Yes.
Like, let them come up with the answer, right? Like, and then let them try and fail again. But then as a leader, you can also communicate with your business of saying, hey, we have somebody we're developing, and let's help work with them through this. Like, come to me if that gets not working, but allow them to help build that relationship. And that's where I've seen a lot of the really strong relationships being built with more of the up and coming recruiters, is when you give them the platform of saying it's all right to fail as long as we learn and we try new things, right?
Yeah. And I think your analogy around not giving them the answer, it's very much like parenting, right? That sort of common question that a lot of parenting gurus say, instead of telling them what to do, saying, well, what do you think should be next? What do you think? And that puts them in the opportunity to actually not just listen for you to get the answer, but actually to stop and say, I don't know. And they've got to be forced to kind of figure that out. One of the things we haven't talked about yet that I think is such an important part of this conversation are the metrics, right? Because even with all of the strategy, the planning, the tactics that, that we're trying to elevate past, and the hurdles that get in our way, ultimately we're trying to prove value here. So one of the things that I've often in my past experience coached clients or colleagues on as they're trying to learn and grow is to make sure that they're working towards something and they're showing that measurable impact. Molly, I want to turn to you for a second, particularly from the place where you sit, because I know that's important with clients and customers. What are some of the metrics or KPIs do you see that kind of broadly are most important to measure success and impact when we're thinking about strategy? So it's not just pure numbers, right? It's not just moving through the journey of talent acquisition.
Sure. I love that question. So I'll give you the run-of-the-mill answer, and then I'll tell you some of the metrics that I have encountered that I think were so interesting and insightful and impactful. Like we work with people who do, I would say that measure your typical metrics, like your time to fill a role, the pass-through rate, things of that nature. But what I've seen be the most impactful for a couple of businesses is post-success hire. And I'm like, this is such an interesting concept. How do you even start to measure this? And people have done it different ways. More than likely, it's a combination of 3 months and 6 months post-hire. Is the employee happy? Are their managers happy with them? And like a matrix between that and performance reviews. And I think that is so important to pointing back and analyzing like the health of your recruiting process and making sure you're getting the right candidates in the door. And then we were talking earlier about being a true business partner to your hiring teams and your tech teams. And just an example, if you know their roadmap and you know, for example, they're filling these roles because they have a big new product launch coming up. And if they don't fill these roles, like they're going to miss their deadlines. So what are some metrics that you could tie back to that? Like, did you help collaborate with them so they were able to fill those roles and they hit their developmental milestones? Like getting those metrics that matter to them and finding a way to correlate them to your hiring metrics.
I love that. I think that's really important because it connects back to what their specific needs are. And also, I think connects to, in general, business-wise, right? Every industry has a different set of metrics that are important. Rondi or Nate, anything to add on the metrics front?
I can go. So I agree with you, Molly, some of those typical, the typical metrics, but one I do love is conversion rates. I do think it helps us understand if we're doing the quality. And as I've, at a few different organizations worked with, to establish performance, targets, we really focus on what are the behaviors we want to do. And like, it's like, time to fill or something. We don't actually look at time to fill. And I think I've said that on the last webinar. We just look more at quality of hire. So I like that you brought that up too. And it's, looking at, are the people staying? And this is something that I want to do more of with our team. Are the people staying? Are they getting promoted? And I like that. I never really thought about are they happy? So I like that. I think that would be a good one to kind of bring into this. But, one of the things we don't look at this on, on a yearly basis, but we look at it over time to see, are people sticking around and are they successful at the organization? And even people that leave voluntarily, that also is a miss, right? Can be, we're dealing with humans. There's always variables that we can't control, but I think it's helpful to even, maybe we hired not the right person because maybe this wasn't the right fit for them.
I do love new hire satisfaction rate and happiness because you should be creating a hiring and interview process where they get an opportunity to interview you just as much as you're interviewing them. Like you should be open and transparent with what your business culture is like and the types of work that they will be working on, the types of projects, the people they'll be working on. All of that contributes.
I would also. I'm sorry. We all love data. Clearly, I love.
I know, right?
Data.
It's funny. I kind of have like a love-hate relationship with time to fill. It gets a bad rap a lot of times because it's like such a simple metric that people are like, well, that doesn't really tell us a lot. But from a business planning perspective, if we're talking about being a partner to the business and getting a seat at the table, understanding the implications of what Molly was talking about earlier of building products and how we're monetizing and growing our revenue, especially if we're talking about like pre-IPO startups that are looking to raise their next round. Like right now, financial metrics and growth are the biggest metrics that startups are looking at, especially with their venture VC firms. And being able to say, yes or no, we are on track to hit, and we forecast to be able to make these hires, to build these products, to sell these products, to support these products, whatever, is going to help us get to those milestones. And that gives you more ingrained into the business. And it's a simple metric, but I think it is an important metric for that purpose of the forecasting with the business aspect and less of the, does it really tell the quality of hire?
you raise a really important point too. I know we all keep touching on this notion, and it all comes back to customization for the business, right? Time to fill. If you're running, retail, hospitality, hourly recs, right? Time to fill. If you've got all these evergreen recs, that may be a different perspective, and you might have a different you might have a different element. It's the same thing, same perspective that I have on source of hire. I argue, and have been for years, that there's actually no such thing as source of hire. We should be measuring source of influence, because there is no such thing as a single source of hire. You have anywhere between, our research tells us you have anywhere between 8 and 20 influences on your decision to take and keep a job. And it's almost impossible to measure all of those on and offline influences, right? And really your source of hire is often most likely your last click or your last port of call before you apply. So the challenge, I think, with KPIs overall, and if we connect it back to our topic today, if you're really going to be the pilot here, it's to be strategic and educate your audience to say there's no one set of metrics, right? You have to be educated on all of the metrics, and you have to understand that all the metrics too have a lot of fingers and hands in them. So time to fill isn't just controlled by the recruiter, right? You could have a hiring manager that's messing up your time to fill. Quality of hire isn't just controlled by a hiring manager. You could have a recruiter that might be hoarding candidates. And so that's part of the challenge too, is educating your audience, not placing blame, but helping them, understand kind of those gray areas that exist with KPI.
Very good point.
For sure.
Very good point.
I think as we talk about sitting in that pilot seat, one of the things that's incredibly important is also talking about the business. So even going a layer even further up to the business itself. And Nate, you talked a minute ago, particularly about startups and the importance, what matters to them right now. It might be going through an M&A transaction or prepping for an IPO. Understanding the business goals is probably the most important thing you can do for your career. And Rhonda, you were talking about, earlier in your career, making some choices or doing some things as you were learning and growing. And so I think as I want to open up the conversation or shift us into talking a little bit about alignment between business goals, strategic goals of the organization and the technology, because to me, that's probably the number one most important thing you can do as a TA leader, is to show your understanding of the business and the business goals and connecting it back to that. So Nate, I want to start with you. How can a new TA leader, someone who's moving into this role, excuse me, launching TA tech, really drive that alignment? How can they show they understand those overall business objectives?
Absolutely. So not only is it spending time, if you have the time, right? That's the challenge. If you have the time to crawl before you sprint, then build relationships. It's the most important thing, is build relationships with the business. I did an interim, as a little side note, I did an interim head of talent gig. And then after like 3 months, helped the company scale. Then I hired the full-time person, and they kept me on. Just one of the smartest things was they kept me on for like 2 or 3 months to support TA while she went and built the relationships with all the business and built that trust with them. And that set her up for success. Like, I handled the operations of the tech, all the reporting and metrics and the day-to-day with the team, and allowed her to build those relationships. And because of that, not only we created an awesome friendship, and she's one of my top consultants, but that allowed her to really kind of to get in with the business. But I think it comes down to, like, you have to understand how talent acquisition impacts every part of the business when we're creating OKRs for the organization, right? So it's like, how do you tie in your OKRs to make a meaningful impact on the company-wide OKRs and objectives, right? And when you do that and you deliver on that, because it's so easy just to create like OKRs that are like, we'll hit them or whatnot, right?
For somebody who doesn't know, because we might have folks that don't know, what's an OKR?
Objective key results for the business. It's usually quarterly. It drives either 1, 3, or 5 year plans. It's all reverse engineered to core metrics.
Uh-oh,
Really
he's
good book if you guys,
up.
really good book if you want to talk about long-term planning and objective setting. But what I've found is that when they understand your position and you know how you drive to help hit their OKRs and you're consistently hitting them, and they're like really deeply thought objectives that aren't just like, I threw them together the day before they were due. One time I was talking with the CFO of a company I worked at, and we didn't have hiring goal. We've never had hiring goals before January, right? For that year. It's just not a thing that happens. But I was telling him the importance of it. And he's like, the CFO goes, it doesn't matter. I don't expect recruiting to hit their hiring goals. We just throw it out there, whatever. I was like, interesting. Did you tell Jim, the CRO, that it's not important for him to hit his sales goals each quarter? He's like, absolutely not. I was like, think about recruiting the same way. We're an activity-driven, performance-driven business that impacts the whole organization. I want meaningful goals that we can hit. And those sort of conversations, like for him, it clicked. He's like, oh, okay. He gets it, right? And so I really more ingrained myself into that business because of that sort of conversation I was able to have and creating objective, really strong OKRs.
Rondi, what's your experience in terms of ensuring alignment, especially when it connects to the business objectives? I'd love you to talk particularly as you're thinking about your own career and some of those early days too.
Well, I think in my early days, I had no idea that a business had business objectives. But yeah, as I've, grown in my career, knowing what we want to do. And the great thing I think about my current organization, and actually a number of my former organizations, is we know about them. We have, we just in February, we gathered as an entire organization, and it was a great time. And we learned what our executives have been thinking about and what they want to accomplish in the year. And so I think those should be cascaded, right? We've got, this overall organization, then you have your groups and then your teams. That should all have a cascading effect. The other thing I think is so important from a satisfaction, Molly calling you out, a satisfaction standpoint is I know what my line of sight is to the success of the business. I know that when I am working and I'm leading this team and then the team is, working on roles, that being a part of hiring those roles will actually impact the success of the organization. And that also helps us prioritize which roles are more important, not as roles, but what are more important to get, what are the more critical hires. So
I'm glad you shared both those things, particularly as it relates to the line of sight and to understanding the objectives, because that's also something leaders can do as they're coaching more junior folks, is test them on that. Say, do you know the objectives of the company? If you're a public company, did you listen to the latest investor call? And 99% of them will say, investor call, what's that? Do you know, have you heard our CEO speak? Did you go see her speak on, CNN or whatever it was? And most of them will say, huh? I think it's also because, so many people start in agency recruiting because that's such a breeding ground for recruiters. Not a bad thing at all. But when you're agency recruiting, you're not invested in the business objectives in the same way. And so I think that's such an important point that you mentioned.
One thing when you're talking about listening to earnings calls. So one thing that I do to kind of foster that is this is part of our role, but then in our chat during the investor call, we're calling things, oh, that analyst asked a funny question or whatever. And so then trying to just have because, we're remote, we have to have some engagement. When I worked for a different public organization, we would actually gather as a TA team and sit in the conference room and listen to it together.
Excellent. I love that idea. That's a fantastic idea. It also helps too, because a lot of HR team members don't come from business backgrounds. Before I went to business school, I had no idea what a P&L was. So it helps to learn those terms and to be vulnerable and say I don't know what they're talking about. Can someone help me? I love that. Molly, any thoughts to add here?
Yes. So going back to the OKRs, the reality is probably some of us work at organizations where the pace is so fast and things are chaotic that the business might not even know their own OKRs, or they change like with every season or quite frequently. And as a new leader coming in, I would recommend, if you really want to establish yourself as a business leader, be the one that's out there and vocal and pushing the business to be thinking about these things, and for them to formulate those OKRs and help them distribute them to all teams, not just your team. I think you'll really be thought of as a business leader if you can help shape their thinking.
It's such an important way to stay ahead too, not just for yourself, because if they're not doing it, you can still do it for your small team or function and set the standard, right? But it also helps you stay ahead of your competitors too, because it allows you to track things that perhaps others aren't doing. Once you're tracking those things, you're staying ahead and you're in the forefront from an industry perspective. One of the things I do love about our industry is there's a lot of communication, there's a lot of sharing, a lot of cross collaboration across businesses, and there's a lot of great things happening. But there's so many places, so many stories, excuse me. It's sometimes hard to track what's going on. So Rondi, let me start or pick on you for just a second, particularly in your role. How, with you and your team in your current role now and in past roles, how are you staying ahead of all of the trends, all of the changes, particularly in technology? Because it can be really overwhelming. I think especially the amount of vendors right now, when the economy gets challenging, vendors and TA technology teams sometimes get nervous and they start banging down your door. There are some really good, like CoderPad, there's some really good platforms and products. How do you really stay ahead of all of that? How do you educate your team to find those trends so that you can be competitive, but also be strategic? You can't entertain all of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, we do get reached out to a lot, and a lot of products are great. And, if we're ever going to consider a product, we do like a needs assessment. We do like a formal needs assessment. So I don't know if I have much more to add there, but some of the other things that I would say around keeping current with things are reading. I say this even in my own role and then in my teams, like what I love about TA is I learn every single day. Just in every meeting I'm in, I'll ask, I don't know what that is. Where do you learn that information? I have a recruiter on my team who's been a tech recruiter for a long time, and he has certain publications that he just looks at every day, even for just a few minutes. So he comes to that meeting, and he's, they know that he knows kind of the market. The other thing that I think, this is not based on technology other than, getting reached out to on LinkedIn, is I make it a point to meet with at least one person a week, but usually two people a week that have reached out to me on LinkedIn, because I just want to learn more from their background. And it keeps me sharp. And also I learn tons from those conversations. A lot of stuff comes from publications or just going to events or getting involved, but some of it is just talking to a human, so
it's so important.
A little like new school, old school approach.
Well, even this conversation, right? I'm learning from the three of you. It is so hard sometimes to make the time and the space, but we're going to learn so much more from the dialogue, no doubt. Nate, what would you add to that?
So recruiting it's a lifestyle, right? Like we chose to do this job. This is not a 9-to-5 job. This is not a Monday through Friday job. I'm always in, I'm a part of probably 20, 30 different recruiting groups on Facebook. I'm on the board for the Austin Recruiter Network. I stay deeply connected with people. I stay curious often. I ask questions. If there's a problem that I'm having a hard time solving, I post it. Well, how are you guys solving for this? I'm having this issue, and maybe it's a tool it's a feature in a tool that I already have, and I just don't know. But I'm always asking. I'm always trying. I'm testing. And I actually like being early testers to new products. I was very early on with HireTool, which is now HireEZ. I was early on with Ashby. the ATS. I was early on with a couple of other tools, and you can actually influence these tools to be what you want them to be, right? Like if you're an early adopter of it, you're an early adopter for a reason.
Yeah.
So like I encourage my team to always stay curious and to try demos on their own. And if there's something that like fits a need, come to me and let's talk about it. Because it's not just me. I'm not the one on boots in the ground every single day. It's my team. And so if there's something that's going to solve a problem, that's going to make them more efficient, that's going to help, drive more impact to the business and ultimately deliver quicker, then I'm all ears for it. And I will always demo and always learn. And, you can always, also learn about new tools through the integrations that you're like if you're ATS, you go to the integrations tab, like, oh, here's a couple of new tools I haven't heard about. Let's go try it. Right. So spend time reading articles at night, blogs, talking with people, asking questions. Like that's how I stay ahead of the curve in terms of like new tools and technologies that can help impact our business.
Two quick things that I'll add that I think is important. One is look for staying power. If I look over my 25 years in this space at the number of unicorns in HR technology and the number of companies that have gotten a lot of attention and then left the business, I think it's not just about attention, right? I had a conversation. Some of you may know Josh Sweetie, who's been in the space for a really long time in TA technology. And I were talking earlier today. We were talking about the fact that there's a lot of companies that get a lot of that attention, but it's the companies that have the staying power in TA technology because they're able to build the client base, because they're able to really deliver strategically. And I think that's what's so important. That's what you've got to look for. And my best tip for doing that is to talk to existing customers, but ask them this one question. What do they wish they had known at the buying process or in the beginning of the implementation process that they know now, a year out or a year and a half out or 2 years out? Because that's the hard part. Once you make the buying choice, it's really hard. Excuse me. It's very hard to go back. And that's why it's so important to get as educated as you can on the front end, and find partners like Molly that are willing to actually understand and listen and hear your challenges on the front end. I think that's really, really important. That may be where technology comes into play in making sure that it enables that strategic approach. So it's not just you as the leader. We've also got to look at the platform itself. And so, Molly, I do want to give you a chance, as we kind of have a few more minutes here, to talk for just a minute about the role technology can play. So as we're thinking about as leaders, how we can be strategic, how do we leverage our technology to do that? What are we missing instead of just the plug and play?
Sure. I have thoughts on this. I probably should not say this being a tech vendor, but at the end of the day, I mean, a tool is a tool. And if you put a bad process into a tool, you're going to get bad results. It's kind of like multiplying a positive and a negative. It's going to be negative. But if you can really be strategic and think about the outcomes you want, find the right tool for that, and you have a positive and a positive, you're going to get exponential benefits. One of the reasons that I love CoderPad so much, and one of the ways that I think we can really help, is that calibration of what a good candidate looks like. So as you're building and fostering those relationships with your hiring managers, getting very finite and granular, like, let's define what a good candidate looks like. What skills must they have? What's important to you? And then we have the tools that can help you measure that. But if you just measure a candidate without knowing exactly what you're looking for, you're not going to get the results. So that would be my advice, is figuring out what matters to you and then using technology to help you do that. For example, again, like skills. Leverage technologies like CoderPad that can help you really measure those skills and continue to calibrate them with your hiring managers. The more you calibrate, the more success you're going to have, the more trust they're going to have in you, because you're passing over better candidates. They're not wasting time on interviews that shouldn't have happened in the first place. And that relationship will continue to grow and be more successful.
Thank you for sharing that. We've got I've got a couple of other questions I wanted to ask, but we've also got some really good questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to jump over there for just a second. One of the ones particularly, and apologies if I get your name wrong, I think from Ashana. I got a piece of advice from my manager as a people and talent intern at a sales tech startup, fake it till you make it, when it comes to representing the company during screening or onboarding calls. What are your thoughts on that in any such situation, especially for a remote role? Anyone want to jump in and take that one?
I have thoughts on it. I'm sure that you guys do as well. I mean, there is a certain element if you have to be polished and put the company in the best light, but really the truth is it's gonna come out, or it should come out. If you continue to put Band-Aids over it, that's where you get this candidate who 2 months into their role is like, whoa, this was a bait and switch. I didn't know any of this. If I had known, I still might have made the same decision, but I would have made an informed decision.
Mm-hmm. Rondi,
I have some similar feelings. I think everybody is doing a little bit of fake it till you make it, right? Like I think most people are. But I do think doing that with authenticity is very important. So when you don't know the answer to something, to say, that's a great question. I haven't come across that before. Mm-hmm. I'll look into it. I joke that I was a high school teacher, as I mentioned, and that's really where I learned that lesson. There's no faking it with high school students. And so I just think doing it with, yes, there is an element of, polish and faking it. But I also think doing it with authenticity and making sure that you're acknowledging the things that you don't know and that you can go find out.
Frank asked a really great question in the chat, which I love and is a good one, I think, for all of you. So Rondi, I'll start with you. As a TA leader, what is something you wanted to get support for on the technology side that you were not able to?
What I'm working on is, and I think I'll get it. I just need to make, I need to bring up my polish on this is so with technology, some pre-hire assessments, like we use them in India, but we don't use them in North America. Well, actually we do use them in North America, but the teams develop them, which I do think like that's part of my ROI for the teams. And, so I think that's something that I would like to, if we had more money at the moment, that's what I would like to spend the money on.
Nate?
I have an answer.
Yeah.
I got one. For me, it's always been like more dynamic reporting. Keep in mind, startups like try to minimize cost on tools, try to be scrappy internally. I cannot tell you how many times that I've been like, I found a good reporting tool that plugs into our ATS, or because we all know reporting out of ATS is not always the best, and it's not as dynamic as you would like it to be. Mm-hmm. So I've always got pushback and had a hard time investing in analytics schools because we either have Power BI or we have Tableau, and then like we'll go talk to engineering and we'll get dashboards built out for you. But what happens 100%, I'll say 99% of the time, is that you get pushed down on the backlog because talent acquisition is always not as important as building reporting tools for product usage or lead gen for marketing or fill in the blank, right? And so like there's always the interest there, but to get the actual spend for like a tool like that, I've always had a really hard time.
It's really, I think that's a really important thing to call out is even for folks that are really experienced, we all still run into hurdles all the time getting that spend. Two things that I'll share. One is lean on your partners, right? If you really want to use a tool like CoderPad, for example, or platform, ask them for help. I do this with my clients all the time. If they're struggling, I'll say, come to us. We can help you build a business case. And then also, I think it's also important to accept defeat sometimes. Prior to starting Exactquio, I ran the employer brand and marketing function for Marriott International. And I built the industry's first ever social media recruiting game called My Marriott Hotel. This was many years ago at the time. It was a huge initial out of the gate success. We were on the front page of the marketplace section of the Wall Street Journal. My CHRO was featured. Huge success. I got to meet with Mr. Marriott, present it to the board, probably one of the pinnacles of my career. And then the game failed because I couldn't make the business case for additional funding because it was too innovative. It was too far ahead of its time. I couldn't prove the value because I couldn't get the executives and the board to see where social media was going. This was in the really 2009, 2010, quite some time ago. But you can envision at that time, a conservative organization, operations, service driven, having a hard time thinking about that. So it's a really good, I think, wrap up to our conversation. As you're thinking about going from passenger to pilot, really think about where you are as a business. Lean on your leaders, lean on your colleagues, be vulnerable, listen, and lean on your partners. And with that, I want to thank Rondi. I want to thank Nate. I want to thank Molly. I want to thank CoderPad. Please check out coderpad.io for the support of this conversation, and lean on those vendors too. That's what they're there for, is to support you. So Josh, I'll turn it back over to you.
Wow, Susan, round of applause. Did not disappoint. Thank you so much for leading today's discussion. In today's competitive tech landscape, finding the right talent it's hard. However, with CoderPad, things become easier. Whether you're in TA, a hiring manager, a company seeking top-notch tech developers, CoderPad's going to empower you to streamline your hiring processes with those gamified assessments, take-home projects, and live paired programming interviews. I want to say thank you again to our panel, Nate, Molly, Rondi. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to contribute to today's discussion. And to all of you that tuned in for the live broadcast, thank you so much for your continued support of this program. We're always looking for speakers. So if you want to get involved with our content, please reach out. If you're not ready to be a speaker, but you've got a burning topic that you want to learn more about, please let us know, because we want to make sure that we're delivering the information that you need. And without any further ado, we're going to wrap this up. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Thanks.
I got the balloons. Nice.